The Footsteps That Ran by Dorothy L. Sayers. Mr. Bunter withdrew his head from beneath the focusing cloth. "I fancy that will be quite adequate, sir," he said deferentially, "unless there are any further patients, if I may call them so, which you would wish to put on record." "Not today," replied the doctor. He took the last stricken rat gently from the table and replaced it in its cage with an air of satisfaction. "Perhaps on Wednesday, if Lord Peter can kindly spare your services once again." "What's that?" murmured his lordship, withdrawing his long nose from the investigation of a number of unattractive looking-glass jars. "Nice old dog," he added vaguely. "Wags his tail when you mention his name, what? Are these monkey glands, Hartman, or a southwest elevation of Cleopatra's duodenum?" "You don't know anything, do you?" said the young physician, laughing. "No use playing your bally fool with an eyeglass tricks on me, Wimsey. I'm up to them. I was saying to Bunter that I'd be no end grateful if you let him turn up again 3 days hence to register the progress of the specimens, always supposing they do progress, that is." "Why ask, dear old thing?" said his lordship. "Always a pleasure to assist a fellow sleuth, don't you know? Tracking down murderers. All in the same way of business and all that. All finished? Good egg. By the way, if you don't have that cage mended, you'll lose one of your patients. Number 5. The last wire but one is working loose, assisted by the intelligent occupant. Jolly little beasts, ain't they? No need of dentists. I wish I was a rat. Wire much better for the nerves than that fizzling drill." Dr. Hartman uttered a little exclamation. "How in the world did you notice that, Wimsey?" "I didn't think you'd even looked at the cage." "Built noticin', improved by practice," said Lord Peter quietly. "Anything wrong leaves a kind of impression on the eye. Brain trots along afterwards with the warning. I saw that when we came in. Only just grasped it. Can't say my mind was glued on the matter. Shows the victim's improving anyhow. All serene, Bunter?" "Everything perfectly satisfactory, I trust, my lord," replied the manservant. He had packed up his camera and plates and was quietly restoring order in the little laboratory, whose fittings, compact as those of an ocean liner, had been disarranged for the experiment. "Well," said the doctor, "I am enormously obliged to you, Lord Peter, and to Bunter too. I'm hoping for a great result from these experiments, and you cannot imagine how valuable an assistance it will be to me to have a really good series of photographs. I can't afford this sort of thing, yet," he added, his rather haggard young face wistful as he looked at the great camera, "and I can't do the work at the hospital. There's no time. I've got to be here. A struggling GP can't afford to let his practice go, even in Bloomsbury. There are times when even a half-crown visit makes all the difference between making both ends meet and having an ugly hiatus." "As Mr. Micawber said," replied Wimsey, "income £20, expenditure 19,19,6. Result, happiness. Expenditure £20, ought 6. Result, misery. Don't prostrate yourself in gratitude, old bean. Nothing Bunter loves like messing round with the pyro and hyposulphite. Keeps his hand in. All kinds of practice welcome. Fingerprints and process plates spell 7th, what you may call it, of bliss. But focal plane work on scurvy-ridden rodents, a good phrase, acceptable if no crime forthcoming. Crimes have been rather short lately. Been eating our heads off, haven't we, Bunter? Don't know what's come over London. I've taken to prying into my neighbours' affairs to keep from going stale. Frightened the postman into a fit the other day by asking him how his young lady at Croydon was. He's a married man, living in Great Ormond Street." "How did you know?" Well, I didn't really, but he lives just opposite to a friend of mine, Inspector Parker, and his wife, not Parker's, he's unmarried, the postman's, I mean, asked Parker the other day whether the fly-in shows at Croydon went on all night. Parker, being flummoxed, said no, without thinking. Bit of a giveaway, what? Thought I'd give the poor devil a word in season, don't you know? Uncommonly thoughtless of Parker. The doctor laughed. You stay to lunch, won't you? He said. Only cold meat and salad, I'm afraid. My woman won't come Sundays. Have to answer my own door. Deuced unprofessional, I'm afraid, but it can't be helped. Pleasure, said Wimsey, as they emerged from the laboratory and entered the dark little flat by the back door. Did you build this place on? No, said Hartman. The last tenant did that. He was an artist. That's why I took the place. Comes in very useful, ramshackle as it is, though this glass roof is a bit sweltering on a hot day like this. Still, I had to have something on the ground floor, cheap, and it'll do till times get better. Till your vitamin experiments make you famous, eh? Said Peter cheerfully. You're going to be the coming man, you know. Feel it in my bones. Uncommonly neat little kitchen you've got anyhow. It does, said the doctor. The lab makes it a bit gloomy, but the woman's only here in the daytime. He led the way into a narrow little dining room, where the table was laid for a cold lunch. The one window at the end, farthest from the kitchen, looked out into Great James Street. The room was little more than a passage and full of doors, the kitchen door, a door in the adjacent wall leading into the entrance hall, and a third on the opposite side, through which his visitor caught a glimpse of a moderate-sized consulting room. Lord Peter Wimsey and his host sat down to table, and the doctor expressed a hope that Mr. Bunter would sit down with them. That correct person, however, deprecated any such suggestion. "If I might venture to indicate my own preference, sir," he said, "it would be to wait upon you and his lordship in the usual manner." "It's no use," said Wimsey. "Bunter likes me to know my place. Terrorizing sort of man, Bunter. Can't call my soul my own. Carry on, Bunter. We wouldn't presume for the world." Mr. Bunter handed the salad, and poured the water with a grave decency appropriate to a crusted old tawny port. It was a Sunday afternoon in that halcyon summer of 1921. The sordid little street was almost empty. The ice-cream man alone seemed thriving and active. He leaned luxuriously on the green post at the corner in the intervals of driving a busy trade. Bloomsbury's swarm of able-bodied and able-voiced infants was still, presumably within doors, eating steamy Sunday dinners inappropriate to the tropical weather. The only disturbing sounds came from the flat above, where heavy footsteps passed rapidly to and fro. "Who's the merry and bright bloke above?" inquired Lord Peter presently. "Not an early riser, I take it? Not that anybody is on a Sunday morning. Why an inscrutable providence ever inflicted such a ghastly day on people living in town, I can't imagine. I ought to be in the country, but I've got to meet a friend at Victoria this afternoon. Such a day to choose. Who's the lady? Wife or accomplished friend? Gather she takes a properly submissive view of a woman's duties in the home, either way. That's the bedroom overhead, I take it." Hartman looked at Lord Peter in some surprise. "'Scuse my beastly inquisitiveness, old thing," said Wimsey. "Bad habit. Not my business. How did you—" "Guesswork," said Lord Peter with disarming frankness. "I heard the squawk of an iron bedstead on the ceiling and a heavy fellow get out with a bump, but it may quite well be a couch or something. Anyway, he's been pottering about in his stocking feet over these few feet of floor for the last half-hour, while the woman has been clattering to and fro in and out of the kitchen and away into the sitting-room with her high heels on, ever since we've been here. Hence deduction as to domestic habits of the first-floor tenants." "I thought," said the doctor with an aggrieved expression, you'd been listening to my valuable exposition of the beneficial effects of vitamin B and Lynn's treatment of scurvy with fresh lemons in 1755. I was listening, agreed Lord Peter hastily, but I heard the footsteps as well. Fella's toddled into the kitchen, only wanted the matches, though. He's gone off into the sitting room and left her to carry on the good work. What was I saying? Oh, yes, you see, as I was saying before, one hears a thing or sees it without knowing or thinking about it. Then afterwards one starts meditating, and it all comes back, and one sorts out one's impressions, like those plates of Bunter's. Pictures all there. What's the word I want, Bunter? Latent, my lord. That's it. My right-hand man, Bunter. Couldn't do a thing without him. The picture's latent till you put the developer on. Same with the brain. No mystery. Little grey books, all my respected grandmother. Little grey matter's all you want to remember things with. As a matter of curiosity, was I right about those people above? Perfectly. The man's a gas company's inspector. A bit surly, but devoted, after his own fashion, to his wife. I mean, he doesn't mind hulking in bed on a Sunday morning and letting her do the chores, but he spends all the money he can spare on giving her pretty hats and fur coats and what not. They've only been married about 6 months. I was called in to her when she had a touch of flu in the spring, and he was almost off his head with anxiety. She's a lovely little woman, I must say. Italian. He picked her up in some eating place in Soho, I believe. Glorious dark hair and eyes, Venus sort of figure, proper contours in all the right places, good skin, all that sort of thing. She was a bit of a draw to that restaurant while she was still there, I fancy. Lively. She had an old admirer round here one day, awkward little Italian fellow with a knife, active as a monkey. Might have been unpleasant, but I happened to be on the spot, and her husband came along. People are always laying one another out in these streets. Good for business, of course, but one gets tired of tying up broken heads and slits in the jugular. Still, I suppose the girl can't help being attractive. Though I don't say she's what you might call stand-offish in her manner. She's sincerely fond of Brotherton, I think, though. That's his name. Wimsey nodded inattentively. I suppose life is a bit monotonous here, he said. Professionally, yes. Births and drunks and wife-beatings are pretty common, and all the usual ailments, of course. Just at present I'm living on infant diarrhoea chiefly. Bound to, this hot weather, you know. With the autumn, flu and bronchitis set in. I may get an occasional pneumonia. Legs, of course, and varicose veins. God, cried the doctor explosively, if only I could get away with and do my experiments. Ah, said Peter, where's that eccentric old millionaire with a mysterious disease who always figures in the novels? A lightning diagnosis, a miraculous cure. God bless you, doctor. Here are 5,000 pines. Harley Street. That sort doesn't live in Bloomsbury, said the doctor. Must be fascinating, diagnosing things, said Peter thoughtfully. How do you do it? I mean, is there a regular set of symptoms for each disease, like calling a club to show you want your partner to go no trumps? You don't just say, this fellow's got a pimple on his nose, therefore he has fatty degeneration of the heart. I hope not, said the doctor dryly. Or is it more like getting a clue to a crime, went on Peter. You see something, a room or a body, say, all knocked about anyhow, and there's a damn sight of symptoms of something wrong, and you've got just to pick out the ones which tell the story. That's more like it, said Dr. Hartman. Some symptoms are significant in themselves, like the condition of the gums in scurvy, let us say. Others in conjunction with... He broke off, and both sprang to their feet as a shrill scream sounded suddenly from the flat above, followed by a heavy thud. A man's voice cried out lamentably. Feet ran violently to and fro. Then, As the doctor and his guests stood frozen in consternation, came the man himself, falling down the stairs in his haste, hammering at Hartman's door. "Help! Help! Let me in! My wife! He's murdered her!" They ran hastily to the door and let him in. He was a big, fair man in his shirt-sleeves and stockings. His hair stood up, and his face was set in bewildered misery. "She's dead, dead! He was a lover," he groaned. "Come and look! Take her away, doctor! I've lost my wife, my Madalena!" He paused, looking wildly for a moment, and then said hoarsely, "Someone's been in, somehow, stabbed her, murdered her. I'll have the law on him, doctor. Come quickly. She was cooking the chicken for my dinner. Oh!" He gave a long, hysterical shriek, which ended in a hiccuping laugh. The doctor took him roughly by the arm and shook him. "Pull yourself together, Mr. Brotherton," he said sharply. "Perhaps she's only hurt. Stand out of the way." "Only hurt?" said the man, sitting heavily down on the nearest chair. "No, no, she's dead. Little Madalena. Oh, my God!" Dr. Hartman had snatched a roll of bandages and a few surgical appliances from the consulting room, and he ran upstairs, followed closely by Lord Peter. Bunter remained for a few moments to combat hysterics with cold water. Then he stepped across to the dining-room window and shouted. "Well, what is it?" cried a voice from the street. "Would you be so kind as to step in here a minute, officer?" said Mr. Bunter. "There's been a murder done." When Brotherton and Bunter arrived upstairs with the constable, they found Dr. Hartman and Lord Peter in the little kitchen. The doctor was kneeling beside the woman's body. At their entrance he looked up and shook his head. "Death instantaneous," he said. "Clean through the heart, poor child. She can't have suffered at all. Oh, constable, it's very fortunate you're here. Murder appears to have been done, though I'm afraid the man has escaped. Probably Mr. Brotherton can give us some help. He was in the flat at the time." The man had sunk down on a chair and was gazing at the body with a face from which all meaning seemed to have been struck out. The policeman produced a notebook. "Now, sir," he said, "don't let's waste any time. Sooner we can get to work, the more likely we are to catch our man. Now, you was here at the time, was you?" Brotherton stared a moment, then, making a violent effort, he answered steadily, "I was in the sitting-room smoking and reading the paper. She was getting the dinner ready in here. I heard her give a scream, and I rushed in and found her lying on the floor. She didn't have time to say anything. When I found she was dead, I rushed to the window and saw the fellow scrambling away over the glass roof there. I yelled at him, but he disappeared. Then I ran down." "Half a mo," said the policeman. "Now see here, sir. Didn't you think to go after him at once?" "My first thought was for her," said the man. "I thought maybe she wasn't dead. I tried to bring her round." His speech ended in a groan. "You say he come in through the window," said the policeman. "I beg your pardon, officer," interrupted Lord Peter, who had been apparently making a mental inventory of the contents of the kitchen. "Mr. Brotherton suggested that the man went out through the window. It's better to be accurate." "It's the same thing," said the doctor. "It's the only way he could have come in. These flats are all alike. The staircase door leads into the sitting-room, and Mr. Brotherton was there, so the man couldn't have come that way." "And," said Peter, "he didn't get in through the bedroom window, or we should have seen him. We were in the room below. Unless, indeed, he let himself down from the roof. Was the door between the bedroom and the sitting-room open?" he asked suddenly, turning to Brotherton. The man hesitated a moment. "Yes," he said finally. "Yeah, I'm sure it was." "Could you have seen the man if he had come through the bedroom window?" "I couldn't have helped seeing him." Come, sir," said the policeman with some irritation. "Better let me ask the questions. Stands to reason the fellow wouldn't get in through the bedroom window in full view of the street." "How clever of you to think of that," said Wimsey. "Of course not. Never occurred to me. Then it must have been this window, as you say. And what's more, here's his marks on the window-sill," said the constable triumphantly, pointing to some blurred traces among the London soot. "That's right. Down he goes by that drain-pipe, over the glass roof down there. What's that roof of?" "My laboratory," said the doctor. "Heavens, To think that while we were there at dinner, this murdering villain—" "Quite so, sir," agreed the constable. "Well, he'd get away over the wall into the court behind. He'll have been seen there, no fear. You needn't anticipate much trouble in laying hands on him, sir. I'll go round there in half a tick. Now then, sir," turning to Brotherton, "have you got any idea what his party might have looked like?" Brotherton lifted a wild face, and the doctor interposed. I think you ought to know, constable," he said, "that there was, well, not a murderous attack, but what might have been one made on this woman before, about 8 weeks ago, by a man named Marinchetti, an Italian waiter, with a knife." "Ah!" The policeman licked his pencil eagerly. "Do you know this party as has been mentioned?" he inquired of Brotherton. "That's the man," said Brotherton with concentrated fury, "coming here after my wife, God curse him. I wish to God I had him dead here beside her." "Quite so," said the policeman. "Now, sir," to the doctor, "have you got the weapon what the crime was committed with?" "No," said Hartman. "There was no weapon in the body when I arrived." "Did you take it out?" pursued the constable to Brotherton. "No," said Brotherton. He took it with him." "Took it with him." The constable entered the fact in his notes. "Phew! Wonderful hot it is in here, ain't it, sir?" he added, mopping his brow. "It's the gas oven, I think," said Peter mildly. "Uncommon hot thing, a gas oven, in the middle of July. Do you mind if I turn it out? There's the chicken inside, but I don't suppose you want—" Brotherton groaned, and the constable said, "Quite right, sir. A man wouldn't hardly fancy his dinner after a thing like this. Thank you, sir. Well now, doctor, what kind of weapon do you take this to have been?" "It was a long, narrow weapon, something like an Italian stiletto, I imagine," said the doctor. "About 6 inches long. It was thrust in with great force under the 5th rib, and I should say that it had pierced the heart centrally. As you see, there has been practically no bleeding. Such a wound would cause instant death. Was she lying just as she is now when you first saw her, Mr. Brotherton?" "On her back, just as she is," replied the husband. "Well, that seems clear enough," said the policeman. "This here Marinetti, or whatever his name is, has a grudge against the poor young lady." "I believe he was an admirer," put in the doctor. "Quite so," agreed the constable. "Course these foreigners are like that, even the decentest of 'em. Stabbing and such like seems to come natural to them, as you might say. Well, this here Marinetti climbs in here, sees the poor young lady standing here by the table all alone getting the dinner ready. He comes in behind, catches her round the waist, stabs her. Easy job, you see, no corsets and nothing. She shrieks out. He pulls a stiletto out of her, makes tracks. Well, now we've got to find him, and by your leave, sir, I'll be getting along." "We'll have him by the heels before long, sir, don't you worry. I'll have to put a man in charge here, sir, to keep folks out, but that needn't worry you. Morning, gentlemen." "May we move the poor girl now?" asked the doctor. "Certainly. Like me to help you, sir?" "No, don't lose any time. We can manage." Dr. Hartman turned to Peter as the constable clattered downstairs. "Will you help me, Lord Peter?" "Bunter's better at that sort of thing," said Wimsey, with a hard mouth. The doctor looked at him in some surprise, but said nothing, and he and Bunter carried the still form away. Brotherton did not follow them. He sat in a grief-stricken heap with his head buried in his hands. Lord Peter walked about the little kitchen, turning over the various knives and kitchen utensils, peering into the sink bucket, and apparently taking an inventory of the bread, butter, condiments, vegetables, and so forth, which lay about in preparation for the Sunday meal. There were potatoes in the sink, half peeled, a pathetic witness to the quiet domestic life which had been so horribly interrupted. The colander was filled with green peas. Lord Peter turned these things over with an inquisitive finger, gazed into the smooth surface of a bowl of dripping, as though it were a divining crystal, ran his hands several times right through a bowl of flour, then drew his pipe from his pocket and filled it slowly. The doctor returned, and put his hand on Brotherton's shoulder. "Come," he said gently. "We've laid her in the other bedroom. She looks very peaceful. You must remember that except for that moment of terror when she saw the knife, she suffered nothing. It's terrible for you, but you must try not to give way. The police can't bring her back to life," said the man savagely. "She's dead. Leave me alone, curse you. Leave me alone, I say." He stood up with a violent gesture. "You mustn't sit here," said Hartman firmly. "I'll give you something to take, and you must try to keep calm. Then we will leave you. But if you don't control yourself—" After some further persuasion, Brotherton allowed himself to be led away. "Bunter," said Lord Peter, as the kitchen door closed behind them, "do you know why I am doubtful about the success of those rat experiments?" "Meaning Dr. Hartman's, my lord." "Yes, Dr. Hartman has a theory. In any investigation, my Bunter, it is most damnably dangerous to have a theory." "I've heard you say so, my lord." "Confined you. You know it as well as I do. What is wrong with the doctor's theories, Bunter?" "You wish me to reply, my lord, that he only sees the facts which fit in with theory?" "Thought reader!" exclaimed Lord Peter bitterly. "And that he supplies them to the police, my lord." "Hush!" said Peter, as the doctor returned. "I've got him to lie down," said Dr. Hartman, "and I think the best thing we can do is to leave him to himself." "Do you know," said Wimsey, "I don't cotton to that idea somehow." "Why, do you think he's likely to destroy himself?" "That's as good a reason to give as any other, I suppose," said Wimsey, "when you haven't got any reason which can be put into words. But my advice is, don't leave him for a moment." "But why? Frequently, with a deep grief like this, the presence of other people is merely an irritant. He begged me to leave him." "Then for God's sake go back to him," said Peter. "Really, Lord Peter," said the doctor, "I think I ought to know what is best for my patient." "Doctor," said Wimsey, "this is not a question of your patient. A crime has been committed. But there is no mystery. There are 20 mysteries. For one thing, when was the window cleaner here last? The window cleaner. Who shall fathom the ebony black enigma of the window cleaner?" pursued Peter lightly, putting a match to his pipe. "You are quietly in your bath, in a state of more or less innocent nature, when an intrusive head appears at the window, like the ghost of Hamilton Tighe, and a gruff voice, suspended between earth and heaven, says, 'Morning, sir!' Where do window cleaners go between visits? Do they hibernate like busy bees? Do they—" "Really, Lord Peter," said the doctor, "don't you think you're going a bit beyond the limit?" "Sorry you feel like that," said Peter, "but I really want to know about the window cleaner. Look how clear these panes are." "He came yesterday, if you want to know," said Dr. Hartman rather stiffly. "You are sure?" "He did mine at the same time." "I thought as much," said Lord Peter. "In the words of the song, I thought as much it was a little window cleaner. In that case," he added, "it is absolutely imperative that Brotherton should not be left alone for a moment. Bunter, confined it all, where has that fellow got to?" The door into the bedroom opened. "My lord," Mr. Bunter unobtrusively appeared, as he had unobtrusively stolen out to keep an unobtrusive eye upon the patient. "Good," said Wimsey. "Stay where you are." His lackadaisical manner had gone, and he looked at the doctor as 4 years previously he might have looked at a refractory subaltern. "Dr. Hartman," he said, "something is wrong. Cast your mind back. We were talking about symptoms. Then came the scream. Then came the sound of feet running. Which direction did they run in?" "I'm sure I don't know." "Don't you? Symptomatic, though, doctor. They have been troubling me all the time subconsciously. Now I know why. They ran from the kitchen." "Well?" "Well, and now the window cleaner." "What about him?" "Could you swear that it wasn't the window cleaner who made those marks on the sill?" And the man Brotherton saw? Have we examined your laboratory roof for his footsteps? But the weapon, Wimsey, this is madness. Someone took the weapon. I know. But did you think the edge of the wound was clear enough to have been made by a smooth stiletto? It looked ragged to me. Wimsey, what are you driving at? There's a clue here in the flat, and I'm damned if I can remember it. I've seen it. I know I've seen it. It'll come to me presently. Meanwhile, don't let Brotherton— What? Do whatever he's going to do. But what is it? If I could tell you that, I could show you the clue. Why couldn't he make up his mind whether the bedroom door was open or shut? Very good story, but not quite thought out. Anyhow, I say, Doctor, make some excuse and strip him, and bring me his clothes, and send Bunter to me. The doctor stared at him, puzzled. Then he made a gesture of acquiescence and passed into the bedroom. Lord Peter followed him, casting a ruminating glance at Brotherton as he went. Once in the sitting-room, Lord Peter sat down on a red velvet armchair, fixed his eyes on a gilt-framed oleograph, and became wrapped in contemplation. Presently Bunter came in, with his arms full of clothing. Wimsey took it and began to search it, methodically enough, but listlessly. Suddenly he dropped the garments and turned to the manservant. "No," he said, "this is a precaution, Bunter mine. But I'm on the wrong track. It wasn't here I saw whatever I did see. It was in the kitchen. Now, what was it?" "I couldn't say, my lord, but I entertain a conviction that I was also, in a manner of speaking, conscious, not consciously, my lord, if you understand me, but still conscious of an incongruity." "Hooray!" said Wimsey suddenly. "Cheero for the subconscious what's-his-name. Now, let's remember the kitchen. I cleared out of it because I was getting obfuscated. Now then, begin at the door. Frying pans and saucepans on the wall, gas stove, oven going, chicken inside. Rack of wooden spoons on the wall, gas lighter, pan lifter. Stop me when I'm getting hot. Mantelpiece, spice boxes and stuff. Anything wrong with 'em? No. Dresser, plates, knives and forks, all clean. Flour dredger, milk jug, sieve on the wall, nutmeg grater, 3-tiered steamer. Looked inside, no grisly secrets in the steamer. Did you look in all the dresser drawers, my lord? No, that could be done. But the point is, I did notice something. What did I notice? That's the point. Never mind. On with the dance. Let joy be unconfined. Knife board, knife powder, kitchen table. Did you speak? No, said Bunter, who had moved from his attitude of wooden deference. Table stirs a chord. Very good. On table. Chopping board. Remains of ham and herb stuffing. Packet of suet. Another sieve. Several plates. Butter in a glass dish. Bowl of dripping. Ah, dripping. Yes, there was. Something unsatisfactory, my lord. About the dripping. Oh, my head. What's that they say in Dear Brutus, Bunter? Hold on to the workbox. That's right. Hold on to the dripping. Beastly, slimy stuff to hold on to. Wait. There was a pause. When I was a kid, said Wimsey, I used to love to go down into the kitchen and talk to old Cookie. Good old soul she was, too. I can see her now, getting chicken ready, with me dangling my legs on the table. She used to pluck and draw 'em herself. I revelled in it. Little beasts boys are, ain't they, Bunter? Pluck it, draw it, wash it, stiff it, tuck its little tail through its little what-you-may-call-it, truss it, grease the dish. Bunter, my lord, hold on to the dripping. The bowl, my lord, the bowl. Visualize it. What was wrong? It was full, my lord. Got it, got it, got it. The bowl was full. Smooth surface.
golly, I knew there was something queer about it. Now, why shouldn't it be full? Hold on to
The bird was in the oven.
without dripping.
Very careless cookery, my lord.
The bird in the oven, no dripping. Bunter, suppose it was never put in till after she was dead, thrust in hurriedly by someone who had something to hide. Horrible.
But with what object, my lord?
Yes, why, that's the point. One more mental association with the bird is just coming. Wait a moment. Pluck, draw, wash, stuff, tuck up, truss. By God!
My lord?
Come on, Bunter. Thank heaven we turned off the gas.
He dashed through the bedroom, disregarding the doctor and the patient, who sat up with a smothered shriek. He flung open the oven door and snatched out the baking tin. The skin of the bird had just begun to discolour. With a little gasp of triumph, Wimsey caught the iron ring that protruded from the wing and jerked out the 6-inch spiral skewer. The doctor was struggling with the excited Brotherton in the doorway. Wimsey caught the man as he broke away and shook him into the corner with a jiu-jitsu twist. "Here is the weapon," he said.
"Prove it, blast you,"
said Brotherton savagely. "I will," said Wimsey. "Bunter, call in the policeman whom you will find at the door. Doctor, we shall need your microscope." In the laboratory the doctor bent over the microscope. A thin layer of blood from the skewer had been spread upon the slide. "Well?" said Wimsey impatiently. "It's all right," said Hartman. "The roasting didn't get anywhere near the middle." "My God, Wimsey, yes, you're right. Round corpuscles, diameter 1/3621, mammalian blood. Probably human." "Her blood," said Wimsey. "It was very clever, Bunter," said Lord Peter, as the taxi trundled along on the way to his flat in Piccadilly. "If that fowl had gone on roasting a bit longer, the blood corpuscles might easily have been destroyed beyond all hope of recognition. It all goes to show that the unpremeditated crime is usually the safest." "And what does your lordship take the man's motive to have been?" "In my youth," said Wimsey meditatively, "they used to make me read the Bible. Trouble was, the only books I ever took to naturally were the ones they weren't over and above keen on. But I got to know the Song of Songs pretty well by heart. Look it up, Bunter. At your age it won't hurt you. It talks sense about jealousy." "I have perused the work in question, your lordship," replied Mr. Bunter with a sallow blush. "It says, if I remember rightly, jealousy is cruel as the grave." So that was The Footsteps That Ran, or in fact, it gives its full title, The Vindictive Story of the Footsteps That Ran, by Dorothy L. Sayers. And it's a short story, obviously. It was published in 1928. It was as part of the collection Lord Peter Views the Body. Interestingly, it's set at 24 Great James Street, where she was living at the time of writing. And I think, and it's actually, that address serves as a backdrop for several of her works, including her first novel, Whose Body, and subsequent Lord Peter Wimsey novels. So it's the first one we've done of Dorothy L. Sayers. Now, by this point, you've realised I'm going to talk about the story. So I should have put a timestamp on, so all the people who don't want to hear my opinions, such as they are, I'm not putting myself forward as an expert. I'm just kind of talking about my response to the story, really. I'm just the same as you. So that's it. And if you're not interested in that, just don't listen. How about that? But for those of you who are, as I am interested in the story, let's say something about Dorothy L. Sayers and a little bit about her work. Okay, so Dorothy L. Sayers. This isn't copied from Wiki, by the way. I compile the things and then I write it, all right? So Dorothy L. Sayers was born in 1893, was a prolific English writer, best known for her detective fiction featuring the aristocratic sleuth Lord Peter Wimsey. Despite her enduring fame as a crime writer, Sayers' literary career was multifaceted. She studied medieval literature at Oxford, where she developed a keen interest in the works of Dante Alighieri, which later influenced her own theological writing, so much of her later writing was quite religious. She worked as a copywriter, and you can tell she knows how to use words, for an advertising agency, an experience that informed her portrayal of Lord Peter's adventures in the world of publicity. Murder Must Advertise, 1933. So this was appeared in 1928, but it's actually set in 1921, so I'm not sure exactly when she composed it. Somebody might know. Oh, no. He first came out, he was first published in 1923, so I'm guessing she wrote the stories in the past, maybe. As we all do. When we write, we go back into our own past, don't we? Her detective novels are characterised by a meticulous attention to detail and sharp wit, established her as one of the leading figures of the genre. She often delved into complex psychological themes. I'm not sure about this one. She moved the genre of detective fiction away from pure puzzles lacking characterisation or depth, and became recognised as one of the four queens of crime of the golden age of detective fiction, along with Agatha Christie, Marjorie Allingham, and Ngaio. I never know how to say this lady's name. Ngaio Marsh. Ngaio. Somebody will know how to say it. Let me look it up, because it's always best to look it up. Funnily enough, I remember my dad had quite a few of Ngaio Marsh's stories. Now, and when I looked it up, I found what I didn't know. She was born in New Zealand, which I didn't know. I've never actually narrated one of her stories. And it's a Maori name, so it's a native Maori name. And apparently there are people who say it means different things. A native flowering tree, or light on the water, or little tree bug in the Maori language. Somebody who speaks Maori can possibly correct that. Not me, because I'm not claiming it. She was a member of the Detection Club and worked with many of its members in producing novels and radio serials collaboratively, such as the novel The Floating Admiral from 1931. From the 1930s, she wrote plays mostly on religious themes, and she was a Christian humanist. She was a reviewer for the Sunday Times and often took the opportunity to praise the work of her friend Agatha Christie, calling Murder on the Orient Express a murder mystery conceived and carried out on the finest classical lines. From my reading, it seems that they had a working relationship. So they weren't the besties, they weren't the, bosom buddies, but they had a good mutual respect for each other. So what we've seen is that, and I think Christie does this as well. In the early days, we have these, and of course Sherlock Holmes as well. But in the early days, otherwise, many of the early Victorian and Edwardian and early 20th century novels of the golden age were puzzle novels, and it was about working out the puzzle, and the detective in it was often a cipher, a two-dimensional character, whereas we start to get personality coming through, and we certainly do that with Sherlock Holmes, of course, but and some aspects of psychological analysis, although I think here what we get in this story is the character of Lord Peter Wimsey. I thought she was a linguist as well. And so I think that shows through, because she pays attention to his language. There's a guy called Simon Roper who has a channel on YouTube looking at the history of the English language, particularly at its phonetics and how it was pronounced, historical phonetics, I suppose, historical phonology, and how it was pronounced at different periods. And he rattles off Old English and Middle English, but then he looks at the different accents. Excuse me. I listened to a fascinating one recently when he looked at upper class English accents, going back, and how they changed over 200 years. The Queen and the King, the current King, but also going back to their father and using recorded sources, and before that, written sources, and getting back to the late 1500s. Because people commented on how people spoke and how people should speak, and he actually says them. He talks them out. He mentions this thing that
she does here, that, and it was, at the time she was writing, it was old-fashioned, but old-fashioned aristocrats. And if you look at Punch, and Simon Roper makes this point, not me, but I notice it as well, when they're kind of parodying the speech of the old country aristocrats, they drop the ing at the end. So saying, dripping, I had great fun with that. And so, and the other thing, I mean, I could get into his accent. He's the master of this, Simon Roper is. But the pronunciation of R. So at the time of the 20s, it was a tapped R. So Mary, very hot Mary, not a very hot Mary, as we might do, say in Welsh, or very hot Mary, you know, but a tap. So Mary, very hot, and how the vowels are lifted up. I say post. It's all at the top of the mouth. And that very characteristic, which has gone out of fashion. And then this is Simon Roper, going off. I tried to do that with on, going on, you know, the lengthening the vowel there. A Forester, you know. Anyway, you may be lost and you may be utterly bored by this, but I had great fun doing his accent. I possibly overdid it, to be honest. But I think that just shows her, she's a copywriter, she's a linguist. She has great attention to words and how they're said. That's my whole point there. The story itself, so Wimsey himself was I thought it was very funny. It's very amusing, actually. It's witty. So it wasn't like, we think of later detective stories, currently the ones that we have. They're grimdark, really, aren't they? They're all about really vile things. But these aren't. These are amusements, to use Graham Greene's phrase. They are intended to amuse and make us laugh, even though it's about a murder. And, you know, there is some characterization. The copper is, the way she writes him, he's a stage cockney, isn't he? But also, almost Sir Peter Wimsey is a stage aristocrat as well. Is anybody really that posh? Maybe they are. Yeah, maybe they are. But I thought it was a great fun, that story. I loved being Lord Peter Wimsey. We see in early detective fiction, we, the reader, in this case the listener, I was the reader, you the listeners, we are not given enough information to solve the crime. We kind of have an inkling what's going on, but when he puts the evidence together and he finds the stiletto and the chicken, I didn't. As soon as he was moving towards the knife, I thought, okay, this is where it's going. But I wouldn't have guessed that at the beginning of the story. I thought that he'd probably killed her, the husband had probably killed her, and that the Italian stiletto-wielding foreigner was made up. But not made up because the doctor saw him, but the fact that he was the murderer was made up. I could see where that was going, but the way that Wimsey got there, I couldn't have followed that. So, and I think that's different. I've said that many times. In more modern... This is Discord doing this. I wish it would stop it. This is more modern. In more modern stories, you are given the clues and the reader can detect along with the detective. But in these early stories, it's not usually possible to do that. But still, very great fun. Different from Christie. Funnier, actually. Although Agatha can be funny, but she's a bit more serious, I think. But that was great fun. I'm glad I did it. Dorothy L saves. It was recommended to do by a listener. I'm really sorry, I can't remember your handle, because many of the things come in and people have, like user RG473 or Sunshine Daisy 47, and I'm like, I just can't remember those. So I can't remember who recommended Dorothy L Sayers, but I'm glad I did it. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found my commentary of some value. If you didn't, there we are. But I intend it to be of value, and it just is a kind of celebration of my interest in the stories as well, really. I'm not kind of making any great claims to be an expert. All right. Thanks very much. Please tune in again. Spread the word. Let's grow the podcast. For me, actually. For you too, so I can keep doing stories. But this is just a little favour if you do that for me. All right, thanks.